Welcome to Story Time with Chris James. I will now pick up right where I left off last time. They came to an intersection with 6 other tunnels. One said water below. The next said just too weird. The third said don't go this way in great big letters, followed by several skulls and crossbones. There were also a few exploding bombs written, as well as a thumbs down. The fourth tunnel had a sign that said bottomless pit. Number 5 had kind of okie dokie. The sixth tunnel didn't have a sign. Which one do you think is best for gold fungus? Pam asked Belle. Belle shone her light down each tunnel. I like the one that says don't go this way, with all the cute symbols following. Belle waited for an objection. When no one said anything, she wanted to go ahead and use all of her reasons she'd come up with as to why they should go into the tunnel with all the warnings, but decided to just forget them and take the tunnel. This tunnel was far less attractive, if a tunnel could be considered attractive, than the main one, or the side tunnel for that matter. The ceiling was low, if not for the girls, girls and one witch, who might still be a girl, the bag team. Well, Sarah wasn't exactly with the bag. She was more like an associate, a very young associate. Let's just go with the girls. The girls were all kind of on the short side, especially compared to Hortense, who fortunately hadn't come on this trip. The girls did have to duck under some of the much lower support beams. There were puddles here and there that had to be avoided. It was warm down here compared to the outside, but it was still a bad idea to walk around in wet boots. Sarah was the only one with waterproof footwear. Pam had on some nice warm boots, but they were made for temperature, not hydration conditions. Belle was still in her hot pink running shoes. The floor was scattered with rocks that had come loose from the ceiling. This made it necessary to watch their step as well as their heads and where they placed their hands. It was slow going. Belle kept her IR light in her hand and constantly scanned their surroundings. They walked for about a half hour when Belle spotted something. She got her IR light right up next to the tunnel face. Look, see how it glows? This is gold fungus. Pam and Sarah both crowded in to see what Belle was talking about. There on the wall of the tunnel was a goldish sort of glowing puffiness, kind of hard to describe without using numbers. Sarah didn't have any trouble describing it. Glowing snot? Is that what you're looking for? Belle thought about it. Well, yes, it is snot, kind of, but it's worth a lot in barter with the other witches. No one has any anywhere. She pulled a jar from one of her many hidden pockets. The gold fungus didn't cooperate. She held the jar under a streamer of fungus, but it just hung there. She tried scraping the fungus off with the side of the jar. Next, Belle used the lid to try to scrape the side of the tunnel. The fungus was too deep in its crack. Pam felt in her pockets. Here, try this. She handed Belle a pencil. Belle pushed the tip of the pencil deep into the crack and pushed down. A glob of gold fungus dropped into the jar with a loud thunk. As she was so overjoyed, she did a little "I have something nobody else has" dance. Belle looked around the walls for more of her prize findings. With 2 jars now full of snot, the team walked back out to the main passageway. As they were just feet from the entrance to the main tunnel, Pam thought she heard a sound. Someone was walking along the main corridor. Shh. She held one finger to her lips. I think there's someone out there. Sarah quickly slipped behind Pam. Do you think it's the spirit of a long dead miner looking to kill anyone that violates his favorite mine? Pam was stumped by the question. Uh, maybe. I don't know. But I do know I heard something. The three squatted down and tried to listen. Someone was walking along the tunnel. The sound of rocks being kicked and water splashing became distinct. A flickering light began to grow from the right. It's not a ghost, Sarah whispered. How do you know? Pam thought maybe her minion was becoming psychic or something. 'Cause I can see it. Sarah pointed to the thing walking through the tunnel. The thing was wearing a tuxedo very much in need of a good cleaning or three. Its face was dried and wrinkled. The skin looked green. Not green like Belle, but sickly green, like food gone bad. Hair hung down in need of a brush or a comb. As it walked, the thing held a torch aloft, lighting its way through the dark tunnel. It's a zombie, Belle whispered from the very back of the team. Not that she was scared or anything. Belle just thought she should allow the others a better look at their impending doom. How do you know it's a zombie? Sarah asked. Just look at it. If that's not a zombie, then I'm not a real witch. Are you a real witch? Sarah asked without thinking. Belle snapped her finger and a flame popped from her extended index finger. Oh, yeah, I forgot. Sort of. Sarah hadn't forgot anything. The flickering light was growing fainter as they watched. Soon the tunnel was as dark as, well, something that was very dark. Let's get out of here before that thing comes back. Pam slipped out to the main tunnel. The three misadventurers began the long walk back to the surface. The beam where they'd hung their jackets came into view. As Pam was about to grab her jacket, she heard a crunching sound. We have company again. There was another zombie looking thing walking towards them. There was no place to run. Sarah did what she always did when confronted with scary monsters. She hid behind Pam. Belle pushed herself up against the tunnel wall, pulled her cloak over her head, and closed her eyes. Pam saw the handle of a shovel leaning against the wall. Grabbing it, she made ready to bash the zombie in the head. The handle didn't have a blade. It ended at some broken wood. The zombie was right in front of her. Sarah had both arms wrapped around Pam's waist. She was doing her part to keep Pam from falling over or moving around. Pam hoped she could hit the zombie hard enough with just the handle. The zombie walked right up to the three, and then it kept going right on by, not paying any attention to the three girls. It just kept walking as if it were the only person? The only thing, the only being, yes, the only being in the tunnel. Pam took a deep breath. This was when she realized she'd been holding her breath the whole time. Her head swam about a bit. It's gone. You can open your eyes now. Sarah peeked around from behind. It didn't try to eat your brains? Not even a nibble. Pam poked Belle in the arm. You can come out now. It's safe. Well, at least the zombie is gone. Belle tried to act as if she'd been trying to get her cloak on. I wasn't scared. Much. Let's get out of here before the next zombie shows up. Pam wished she didn't expect any more zombies. As they got closer to the exit, the air got colder. Soon Pam was blowing out a cloud of condensation with each breath. She zipped up her jacket and then she pulled her hat on, followed by her gloves. It's almost 6. George and Wanda are probably wondering where we got to. Belle laughed. Nah, they're probably in the cabin necking. Oh, icky, gross. They're both old people. Old people don't neck. Sarah tried to get at the image out of her head. Oh, come on, they're not that old, are they? Pam knew George was 60 something, but she wasn't all that sure. Wanda was in her late 50s or maybe early 60s, maybe. They stepped out into Wonderland. Wonder, as in, where did all this snow come from? There was a layer of snow on everything. Belle looked at the snow and then down at her running shoes. This isn't good. She had put on some warm leggings before heading out this morning, but the orange and black striped hose only did so much. Pam checked her cell phone. Nah, no messages, but then no signal either. Sarah checked her phone. No bars. Maybe if we climb that hill. She pointed at the tailings piled high at the end of the mine rails. The pile of dirt and rocks removed from the mine had been piled up over the years, or more than likely centuries. Pam looked up at the pointy shaped mound of dirt. I think it might work. She had no idea where the nearest cell tower might be. You coming? She asked her two companions. Well, it looks kind of steep. I may get hurt or something, Sarah said. Belle just looked down at her shoes and then at the snow. Okay, I'll go. You guys stay here and watch for zombies. Pam started making her way up the tracks. Belle and Sarah looked at each other and then fell in right behind her. There's strength in numbers, Belle said. Yeah, you might need our help, Sarah put in. The climb was difficult. It was a 45-degree incline. They had to use the cross ties like they were steps. How did they get the mine cars up here? Sarah asked as she clomb. You see that cable? Pam pointed to the partially buried cable. It was hooked to what that winch at the bottom of the pile. There should be a pulley up at the top. As the top of the mound came close, Pam's cell phone made a "you've got mail" kind of sound. She pulled it from her pocket and opened her messages. There's a message from George. It says they're snowed in Sierra Blanca. He says to stay warm and to not worry. They got a room. I hope they got more than one. Belle gave her mischievous laugh. Pam scrolled through her messages. Here's another one. It says, oh, by the way, we got married while we were in town. Don't you have to wait like 3 days before getting hitched? Belle had a contemplative look on her face. That's what I've heard. Maybe they got a waiver. Pam had no idea how to go about things like this. It was probably I own a gold mine waiver. Belle laughed at her own joke. Sarah was all the way to the top looking around. What's all that over there? She pointed to the northwest. Pam stepped up next to the tween. Gee, it looks like somebody is doing some construction or something. On the other side of the tailings were a dozen travel trailers, the kind you buy when you have lots of money to buy things with. The trailers were all parked in a group around a bunch of tables and chairs. There were some tents set up to one side as if people down there were selling crafts or some such. Everything was covered in a thin blanket of snow. Wow. You think anybody is down there? Sarah was torn between taking a longer look or getting back to the cabin and out of this wind. Pam looked at the trailers. They looked empty. As she was looking from one to another, she noticed that fancy SUV she'd seen earlier. It was parked near one of the campers. I think there might be a few people staying there. There was an old beat up looking 4x4 parked near another camper. Belle sent a quick text to her mother. Ah, try that again. Belle was stomping her feet on the ground, trying to keep them from freezing. Hey, I just had a radical idea. What say we get in out of this cold? Snow was beginning to cling to her black outfit, making her look a lot more festive, but a lot colder. Pam sent a quick text to her mother saying they were fine and having fun. She would have called, but the sun was getting close to the horizon and it was getting colder. A call would have lasted long enough to experience frostbite. Sarah sent a text to her mom saying she was getting tired of having so much fun. This was more of a way to annoy Sandy than anything else. Belle was getting tired of waiting for these two. Hey, could you hurry it up? My feet are freezing. Maybe you should try casting a spell on your shoes, make 'em warmer. Sarah was just joking. That's a totally stupid idea. What makes you think? Belle got a thinking hard look on her face. She looked down at her hot pink shoes. Well, she waved one hand around in the air over her head. When she looked down at her feet and sent strong thoughts to her distant extremities, she sprinkled a bit of dust from one cloak pocket. Her feet did feel a bit warmer. You know what? This just might work. The three began to make their way back down to the bottom of the mound of rocks and dirt. As they walked through the snow, Belle was beginning to leave puddles of water in her wake. Each footfall would melt the snow. Her shoes had become waterproof as well, and she made the most out of sloshing around. Soon the bottom of her cloak began to get heavy with ice as the water refroze. Pam was trying to avoid being splashed. She moved over a few yards and then stopped. Look at this. This is weird. There were a dozen tracks in the snow, all leading back the way they had come. People heading over to visit the campers, or more zombies looking for brains to eat? Sarah suggested. Zombies heading over to visit the campers, Belle laughed. Whatever they are, we should hurry and get back to the cabin before it gets dark. Pam began to walk as fast as Sarah could run. They came across a few more tracks in the snow. All the tracks were going the other direction. I don't want to know what's going on back there, Belle said. What if they attack the cabin? Sarah thought she might have been happier if she'd stayed home on this trip. Let's get inside and warm up. Then we'll try to think of something we can do if they attack. Pam hoped she could come up with something just in case. Chapter 5. Snow. They all but ran up onto the porch. The back door wasn't locked. Pam had noticed none of the doors or windows had any way to secure them. She contemplated looking for some nails and a hammer, just in case. Belle shook the snow from her cloak. She pulled her running shoes off, and they were steaming. Her striped stockings dried before she got near the fireplace. Sarah ran from one window to the next, looking for any zombies that might be trying to sneak up on them. She would look left and then right and then left to be sure nothing had snuck up on her while she was looking the other way. She ran to each window and then went back to where she had started. Pam got busy putting together something that would pass for dinner. As they were finishing up their evening meal, Pam thought she heard a sound. Something was moving about outside. She didn't want to alarm the others, especially Sarah, but when she turned towards the front door, Sarah focused in on the sound as well. There's something out there. It's a zombie. It's come to eat us and turn us into more zombies. I don't want to be a zombie. She got louder with each thought. Belle looked around the room for some place safe to hide. Pam listened as whatever it was made its way across the porch. It made creaking sounds with each footfall. The sounds stopped right outside the door. Sarah screamed. It wasn't very loud because her vocal cords had clamped shut. It sounded like a squeak more than anything. A fist hit the door, followed by another, and then one more. Sarah looked at Pam. "What do we do?" she whispered. Pam looked at the door and then over at her minion. "Zombies don't usually knock." "How do you know? Ever dealt with a zombie before? Maybe he's a very polite zombie." Pam thought back to the zombie attack in the Mall of Doom. "Don't you remember last week when we were—" She remembered that was Black Jacket Pam's Sarah and not her Sarah. The knocking sound came again. "Hey, open up! It's cold out here." The voice didn't sound very zombie-ish. Pam walked slowly to the door. Sarah chose to run, take shelter behind Belle, who was busy trying to think up any anti-zombie spells that she might have learned. Belle was drawing a blank. She tried her invisibility spell, but it wasn't working either. Pam opened the door just enough to get one eye looking out. On the porch stood a young guy in a winter jacket. He was hugging himself, trying to stay warm. "Let me in, I'm freezing to death." He jumped from one foot to the next. "I brought that book of Indian translations the professor asked for." Pam looked around for any desiccated brain eaters that might be lurking in the shadows. All she saw was an old pickup with one headlight sitting out front. The engine was still running. "What professor are you looking for?" Pam thought about it for a second. Maybe you should step inside." She held the door open so the guy could get in out of the cold wind. He looked to be about 20. His jacket wasn't what he'd need on a night like this. He held a huge book under one arm. "I thought Professor Wackenbottom was here. He called and said he needed a book on ancient Indian languages. I got here as quick as I could." Pam thought about that fancy SUV. "I think Professor Wackenbottom might be on the other side of the tailings." "Oh, okay, thanks. What's a tailing?" The guy now had a confused look on his face. "The debris pulled from a mine. It looks like a huge pile of dirt." Pam pointed to the back wall of the cabin. "It's over that way." Gee, thanks. I'll head over there then." He turned for the door. Pam had a sudden worry. What if this professor was trying to do some despicable deed like bring some ancient Indian demon back from the dead? Then she began to wonder if there were any ancient Indian demons that could be brought back from the dead. What exactly does the professor do? The guy turned back at the door. "Professor Wackenbottom is an archaeologist. He found an old Indian village around here somewhere, and he needs this book to translate some writings." "Oh, okay. No demons or monsters or anything like that?" Pam watched the guy as he thought. "No, as far as anybody knows, it's just an abandoned Indian village." He opened the door. "If you guys get a chance, swing on over and have a look. I don't think the professor would mind." And he was out the door. Belle tried to act natural as she walked over to the window and looked out. "I think he likes you. A lot." She gave Pam a look that said more. "Oh, come on. He's like an adult already, and I'm still too young to date." Paula had said that Pam could date only after she was married. Pam didn't know how that was going to work. Sarah wanted to use this new turn of advance to her advantage, but she couldn't figure out how. We should go see the place. That guy did invite us. Belle laughed. No, he invited Pam. I don't think he even knew we were in the room. Regardless of who or what, we're not going anywhere right now. Maybe in the morning. Pam looked around the room. What would y'all like to do now? There was no TV. There was a radio, but there was no electricity. They wound up reading by oil lamp, which is a bit hard, but it could be done. Sarah fell asleep first, and Belle slipped off into dreamland next. Pam got up, walked around the cabin, looking out each window, hoping the zombies would stay away. Pam opened one eye and looked around the room. No zombies had snuck in to kill them during the night. The smell of brewing coffee wafted across from the fireplace. Belle was sitting by the fire. She had a pot suspended over the flames and was stirring it vigorously. Pam felt herself being pulled towards the heavenly elixir. You made coffee. Pam thought she should try to stop stating the obvious. Belle poured a mugful and handed it to Pam. The coffee was all ready to her mouth before she thought. Did the witch put something in it that might cause Pam some problems later on today? No, I didn't add any love potion or memory enhancers to it. Belle gave Pam a big, wearisome smile. Or did I? She tried her cackle, but it was too early for that. Pam swallowed the hot brew. It immediately got busy, sending energizing microbes to her brain. Much better. Pam scanned the countertop that tried to be a kitchen. What do we have to make breakfast out of? Same thing we had for dinner last night. When they stopped for supplies in Van Horn, they'd picked up things that could be eaten with little to no preparation. As far as brushing teeth and scrubbing faces went, they used a bucket of water and the sink. Then it was time to visit the little girl's room. Sarah looked out the window at the snow. Looks cold. Yes, and a long hike from here, Belle added. Unfortunately, it's not the kind of thing we can ignore. Pam pulled on her coat, her hat, and her gloves. The distance to the outhouse was in direct proportion to the need to arrive quickly. Then came the whole who needed to be first problem. Those left outside tried to stay warm by jumping up and down, which didn't help with other physical matters. Belle walked around the outhouse trying to stay warm and wound up melting the snow with her hot shoes. Then the melted water had refrozen. Now there was a ring of ice around the much needed facility. Pam opened the door and slid across the ice. This will be a problem. She pulled herself up from the ground. This is uncivilized, Sarah said. I got a splinter. Oh, ouch. Um, you want me to pull it out or wait until we get to the cabin? Pam was dreading this. It kind of hurts a lot. Could you pull it out right now? Sarah gave Pam her best sweetness look. Okay, drop your pants. What? Why? The splinter's in my finger. Sarah had a shocked look on her face. Pam was relieved. Never mind, let me see your finger then. They spent the morning looking around the cabin for anything to do. There was not much they hadn't already accomplished. Pam wiped the counters off, and then she cleaned the table, even though it was already clean. Sarah got the broom and swept the floor. She didn't really need to, since the floor had been gone over yesterday, but she was that bored. Belle restocked the firewood supply. By noon, they were ready to go anywhere that was not here. I guess I could climb the tailings again and check for messages. Pam looked out at the snow. It didn't look all that cold anymore. She opened the door and found it was actually tolerable. Sarah wanted to go along so she could send word to her mom that she was still alive. Belle went along so she could do something besides look around the cabin. The walk over to the mound of dirt wasn't as bad as the dash for the outhouse had been earlier. The snow just might melt before evening. Once they got to the top of the tailings, Pam had a few messages. One from her mother saying to have fun and take care of George. The next was from George saying the snow was too deep on 54 to even try getting back to them. Sarah looked down at the campers. You should go visit that guy. He probably misses you. I'll bet he didn't sleep a wink. I doubt that. If anything, he was just being polite. Belle jumped up and down. Pam has a boyfriend. Pam has a boyfriend. She began splashing water on everything. This was not very witch-like. Pam was seriously doubting Belle was anywhere near as old as she was pretending. The idea of seeing an old abandoned Indian village was a bit cool sounding. Let's go see the dig site. Maybe they'll let us see some of the artifacts. They traipsed down the tailings and walked over to the campers. It looked like most of the trailers were not being used. Pam saw the old pickup from last night. There were some huge rolls of cable piled in the bed. It was parked with the fancy four-wheel drive. She didn't see anyone around. Hello? Anyone home? Pam yelled. After a minute, one of the doors opened. An older looking guy stuck his head out and looked at Pam. Yes, can I help you? He looked an awful lot like J. Allen Hynek. He had an unlit pipe clutched in his teeth. Howdy. A guy stopped by our cabin last night. He told us y'all were excavating an ancient Indian village and he invited us to come see it. Pam hoped this sounded intelligent. Oh, that must have been Bobby. He said something about people living in the cabin. The professor looked out at the snow. Maybe you should come inside. He held the door open. Pam stepped inside. Sarah was right behind her. Belle stuck her head in and looked around. She wanted to be sure there weren't any weirdos in there first. There were a half dozen people sitting around the living room, which looked more like a badly overused office. There were papers and books everywhere. The people sitting in the mess looked like a combination of student body and beatnik group. One was even wearing a black turtleneck sweater and a beret. He had a cigarette sticking from his mouth, but it wasn't lit. Pam saw there were lights on. They had all stopped what they were doing and they were staring wide-eyed at Belle. Belle decided since all eyes were on her, she should make a grand entrance. She let go with a cackle and stepped inside. When she noticed her shoes were on fire, she stopped laughing. Oops, too much heat. She kicked them off and out the door. Her shoes continued to smolder in the yard. She gave everybody an embarrassed smile. Howdy. The guy from the other night, Bobby, looked at Pam and smiled. Oh, hey, glad you could drop by. I told everyone you guys were just down the road. His eyes kept straying over to the witch. He introduced everybody on their side of the room. So you guys found an ancient Indian village and you're digging it up? Sarah said. Yes, we found an old abandoned building that had been buried under the sand. When we began excavating, we found it had been built on top of another structure. The place must be haunted because ever since we found the site, weird things keep happening. This from a guy in a Star Wars t-shirt. The professor gave the guy a look. Now, there's no such thing as ghosts or evil spirits. We were simply experiencing some unknown geological phenomenon. The guy in the t-shirt still looked a bit uneasy. There's a bunch of symbols all over everything, and we're trying to figure them out. A woman with way too red hair said. There were photos on the floor next to a book that looked like the one from last night. Sarah wanted to see the real thing. Could you get us the 50-cent tour, maybe? Professor Wackenbottom scratched his head. I guess that'd be okay. Douglas, would you mind showing our guests the dig site? Belle poked Pam in the arm. Ask the other guy, Bobby. Go on, ask him, she whispered. Pam tried to ignore her. Come on, I'll show you the site. The beatnik stood up and stretched. He walked to the door, making just a slight detour to avoid Belle. He stepped outside and zipped up his jacket, and then he lit his cigarette. The three girls followed as he led them over to the biggest tent. The tent was closed on all sides, but he undid a flap and held it up. Y'all have power out here? Pam asked. Oh, yeah. We got lights and water, satellite TV, Doug said with pride, as if he'd had something to do with it all. The university sent out a gigantic generator. It's parked on the other side of the hill. We could power a small town with that thing. The doctor really hooked us up. Inside the tent was what was left of an old building. Just the walls were there, and they only came up to about waist high. There were bright orange strings strung back and forth, giving the place a grid for record purposes. Pam looked around and failed. Hmm. Pam looked around the falling down structure. So what's this about the place being haunted? She looked around, but didn't see any ghosts. Douglas just scoffed. It was just Darrell's imagination, along with a few other things, he quickly added, but I never saw anything scary. He quickly looked over his shoulder. In one corner was a hole. It was about 10 feet by 4 feet. There were what looked like stairs leading down. Yellow caution tape was run back and forth over the opening. We found some broken pottery behind that wall. Doug pointed to the far wall. And there was what looked like an old scroll buried with it. Sarah knew her history. Indians didn't use scrolls. They used oral or symbolic traditions to pass on their history. Petroglyphs were the closest things they had to writing. Yes, that was the accepted idea until we found the scroll. Now we have to rewrite what we know about them. Doug pitched his cigarette out the flap. Somehow they managed to make papyrus as well. Oh, come on, papyrus, that's uniquely Egyptian and a little bit of a Greek thing. Sarah was beginning to think these archaeologists were nuts. Well, yeah, but the professor says, see, we found this scroll and it was under most of the pottery. It's the kind of thing little girls wouldn't understand. He gave Sarah a condescending look. Sarah hated being treated like a little kid. Her first instinct was to become very sad and maybe let a tear slip down her cheek. A lip quiver was also called for. But this was what a little girl would do. Having hung out with Pam for most of last year, Sarah was beginning to think like what she thought Pam would think like. She had no idea what Pam just made a decision and ran with it, right or wrong. Had Pam thought the way Sarah thought she thought, maybe she wouldn't have had so many near death experiences. Can we see this Indian scroll? Sarah gave it her best cuteness. She tried to flutter her eyelashes, but all this did was make her look like she had something in her eyes. Yeah, of course, it's in the other trailer. Doug suddenly had the big man with the keys to everything look on his face. A little voice in the back of his mind kept telling him that he was being played, but he chose to ignore it. After all, how could a 12-year-old possibly get the better of him? He led the three visitors over to the trailer that they used for storage. It had an extra lock mounted on the door. The windows were all covered with mesh wire. It looked like it held important valuables. After fishing in his pockets, Doug pulled the key out and unlocked the door. It's in here with all the Indian artifacts we've uncovered. He swung the door open so the three girls could step in. On the left, where the kitchen used to be, Sarah managed to knock anything valuable over. She did bang her knee on something and stubbed her toe on something else. The room popped into view when Doug turned the lights on. On the counter, right next to the stove, was a scroll. It was being held open by a bunch of rocks and arrowheads. Sarah looked at the scroll. Pam looked over her shoulder. It was covered in symbols. That looks like a duck being chased by a flying saucer. She pointed to the top of the scroll. Sarah looked from top to bottom. This looks more like Egyptian hieroglyphics than any kind of Indian writing. Are you sure? Pam had seen plenty of hieroglyphics on Ancient Aliens, and these did kind of look like those, but Egyptians? See this guy here? Sarah aimed her finger at the dog man looking image. It's a werewolf in his boxers, Pam said, thinking it looked a lot like Stanley Vorkalic, only she had never actually seen him in his shorts. It's Anubis, just like what we saw down in the mine. Sarah gave Doug a mischievous look as if to say she knew something that he didn't. Doug had walked up behind them as they were talking. Oh, no, no, see, that's Coyote. He's being represented as being a minor god. Sarah looked over her shoulder at him. More of that "you're crazy" was in her eyes. See, the Egyptians never sailed this far west. They stayed on their side of the ocean. There's no way the two cultures could have met. He began to fidget with his jacket, thinking he wished he were someplace else, away from this minuscule know-it-all. He knew he was right. After all, Professor Wackenbottom had said this was definitely Indian writing. This isn't Indian anything. It's definitely Egyptian. Sarah looked at all the weird symbols, trying to make heads or tails of them. Pam thought about the movie set they had found in the mine. Is there some kind of a huge chamber underneath this place that has maybe a bunch of statues and things? Oh, that. It's an Indian temple to the ant people. Professor Wackenbottom says it's like nothing ever found in the history of finding things. Doug managed to give this as much confidence as he could muster. We're waiting for Dr. Ibibad to come back. He's a renowned expert on ancient artifacts. He was here last week but had to leave for some very good reason. Why not contact the local Indian tribe? You could ask their elders what all this stuff is. Pam thought this made a lot of sense. Oh no, those people, they don't know anything. We asked them and they said this wasn't any of their ancestors' doings. Doug had a believe me look on his face. Dr. Ibibad knows far more about these things than any bunch of uneducated locals. He said locals as if it were a bad thing. Pam thought maybe she should say something. Just don't go reading any scrolls or manuscripts or books in a language that you don't know. She didn't want any more demons or tornadoes being summoned. Belle stuck her head in the trailer door. Why is there an empty sarcophagus in the basement that's falling down building? Doug spun around. You're not supposed to go down there, and what do you mean, empty? That thing is sealed shut. He gave Belle a stern look that quickly vanished when he realized that she just might turn him into a newt or something. Well, it's not sealed now, and there's nobody home in it. Belle did her signature cackle. Professor Wackenbottom stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking at the huge stone vault. It was sealed when we found it. I hope some grave robber didn't sneak in here and steal anything. He gave Belle a look as if just maybe she might have had something to do with the disappearance. All the students were crowded around the empty sarcophagus looking for clues. Clues to what? They didn't know, but this didn't stop them from looking. They all tried their best to stay as far from Belle as they could, which made the small room even smaller. Pam and Sarah were stuck at the top of the staircase. There wasn't any room in the underground chamber. Pam was trying to see what the room looked like. It was small, only room for 4 people, even though there were 8 down there now. In the center was a stone vault that looked like what she'd seen on TV shows when they were talking about mummies. This particular enclosure was huge. All around it were spears and arrows and what looked like dream catchers, only kind of different. Everything in the room looked Indian, a feather, not Dot, except for the stone box. Pam thought it would be a good idea to ask somebody who grew up with this stuff instead of reading books about it. She surreptitiously pulled her cell phone out. She remembered they didn't have a tower nearby. Pam was about to put her phone away when she noticed there was a Wi Fi icon showing a connection was close by. Do you guys have Wi Fi here? She asked anyone in the basement who might want to answer. Anyone except Belle, who was in the basement but probably didn't know the answer. Yeah, we do. The university hooked us up. There's no way I was going to come out here without my connections. This was from the female with bright purple hair. Oh, goody. Could I maybe get the password, just so I could maybe call my folks? Pam hoped this sounded legit. Don't ask, the purple hair said. Oh, sorry, I thought it was. No, that's the password. DONTASK. Don't ask. Pam punched in the letters, and suddenly her phone came to life. She had a few messages. 2 from her mother saying to be careful and have fun and be sure to eat right and don't stay up too late. They both pretty much said the same thing. Pam sent her a reply saying yes to all of the above. The next message was from George saying, the snow is still blocking the road. Him and Wanda were finding things to do to stay out of trouble. Pam sent him a message asking if he had any contacts with the local tribe. Her phone went bling, telling her he'd responded right away. The message said, yes, he did. The guy in charge was named Chief Walking Eagle. Chief Walking Eagle. There was a number with it that Pam guessed was the chief's phone number. Pam poked Sarah in the arm, then whispered, I'm going to make a call. Let me know if any of these guys come up. She punched in the number as she walked away from the stairs going down. She didn't want the professor or any of his students to hear her conversation. The phone rang a few times before being answered. Guadalupe Mountain Casino, how might I direct your call? The woman sounded very efficient. Uh, er, howdy. This is Pam Bogus. I was trying to reach Chief Walking Eagle. Just a second. Let me see if he's busy. There were a few beeps, followed by a buzzing sound, which was followed by the sound of some more ringing. This is Chief Walking Eagle. What can I do for the bogus anomalous group today? Pam ran through her earlier conversation. She hadn't said anything about the bag company, or had she? Uh, howdy, Chief. I was calling to ask about an old abandoned village in your area. Okay, which one? There's quite a few. The chief sounded friendly enough. The village is northeast from Salt Flat, just a few miles north of 62. Wait a minute. Is there an old falling down building with a set of stairs going down into an underground room? With a huge stone vault that is sealed shut for all of eternity? He sounded worried. Yes, sir. Uh, it looks like somebody may have opened the chief began yelling to somebody in the other room. Call downstairs. Tell everyone the casino is closing in 5 minutes. Remember that legend I was telling you about? It's going down now. He came back on the phone, sounding a lot shaken up. Listen, the best thing you can do is get out of there. Move to Canada or maybe Russia. Wait, isn't there something we can do? Pam crossed her fingers. Yes, there is. Run. The chief was still yelling orders to somebody in the next room. Oh, one more thing. When you see George, tell him he still owes me $385 for the restaurant. The line went dead. Pam stared at her cell for a few seconds, hoping that that wasn't it. Pam was just about to try calling back when a pebble landed on the ground next to her foot. She looked up to see Sarah pointing just as the professor and his crew came walking up from the subterranean room. We'll have to contact the local authorities about this break in, he was saying. Belle stuck her head up over the edge of the opening. She looked around before disappearing back down. A few seconds later, she reappeared, acting as if she wasn't trying to pull something off. She kept her hand over a suspicious bulge in one side of her cloak. Sarah was being just as conspicuous as Belle. She walked around looking like a spy or some such. Pam was surprised that nobody took any heed of her actions. The professor had his phone out talking to the sheriff's department. Yes, it's worth a lot of money. Yes, yes, no. I don't know who stole it. Yes, yes. I just said that. It's a dead body from several thousand years ago. Maybe a few thousand or five. Pam watched as the professor listened to the person on the other end of the phone. He scowled and then he hit the end button. The deputies said they were all tied up looking into more serious matters. He suggested I call the state folks. Belle came walking away from the underground room. She kept looking around at the students to be sure none of them were watching her. Everybody was more interested in getting in out of the cold. When no solution was readily available, the students all ran for the comfort of the inside of their trailers. The professor started to follow. Uh, would you like to join us inside? I'm going to call the state investigators, but not out here. It's too cold. Pam was about to answer when Belle cut her off. We got things to do back home in the cabin where we're staying. The witch kept looking around as if somebody might be spying on her. Well, if y'all change your mind to just drop on by. He slipped inside out of the wind. The three began walking back towards George's cabin. Pam wanted to ask Belle what she was up to. So, what did you find that was so interesting you decided to steal it? Pam had a sudden feeling that what she thought it was like being somebody's mother. I didn't steal nothing. Besides, it didn't belong to those dweebs anyway. Belle pulled a 12-inch high letter Y from her cloak. Pam looked at it. She looked some more. Belle held the thing up like it was valuable. Pam continued staring, but the idea of anybody having, let alone stealing, a giant Y was beyond her. Okay. Why do you have a giant Y, and why would it be inside of the sarcophagus? Belle looked at Pam, then at the thing in her hand. She looked back at Pam. It's not a Y, it's a golden slingshot. Oh, Pam looked at the thing, thinking about how they were supposed to be made from wood, as she'd used one once on a camping trip. Belle held the slingshot up like it was the answer to life, the universe. Well, you know. I'll bet this can be used to defeat the killer mummy that was hiding in that stone box. She gave the elastic band a test pull, and it dissolved in her hand. Oh, shoot, it's dried out a bit over the last few millenniums. Sarah was far more impressed. Wow, can you fix it? We might just need to kill a mummy before it eats us and turns us into subservient zombies. I'll see what I can do. Belle began twiddling with the slingshot. When she twisted the handle, a round marble looking jewel fell on the floor. Ah, ammo! She grabbed the round jewel and put it back inside the handle. Pam was still trying to understand why, if it was truly a weapon, it would be buried with its intended adversary. Tongue tied and twisted. Chapter 6 Night of the Dead. Pam awoke with a start. There had been a sound that she couldn't account for. She listened hard, trying to rehear it. Belle was mumbling something about flying monkeys. Sarah was making a weird squeaking sound with each exhalation. The wind was blowing from the north, bringing more cold air down from the North Pole. Pam wished Santa would keep all that cold for his reindeer. The glass in the windows was rattling with each gust. Pam sat up and surveyed her surroundings. The light from the fireplace was just enough to make scary shadows out of everything. The monster in the corner was just a chair with everybody's coat piled atop it. The blob monster was an old recliner George had found on the side of the road sometime in the last decade or three. The shadow moving across the floor was just somebody looking in the window. Pam nearly jumped out of her sleeping bag. She looked at the window. It was almost a full moon, giving enough light to throw shadows on the porch. The shape of a man was centered in the glass. Pam crawled from the bag. It was darker inside than out. The cold air invaded her clothing, making her shiver. She considered grabbing her coat from the chair, but that would have taken much too long. She worked her way over to the wall next to the window. The shape in the glass kept looking in, as if trying to see who was inside. It moved slightly from side to side as it tried to see into the cabin. Pam ran her fingers along her clothing, trying to find her flashlight. She used all of her mental capacity to try remembering where she'd put her light. Coat pocket? No. Next to my sleeping bag? Maybe. Probably not. Backpack. It's in my backpack. Pam remembered pulling the flashlight out and putting it in her pack. Now, where did I put my backpack? She mumbled to herself. Looking around the room, Pam spotted a dark shape lurking on the floor by Sara. It was just the right size and shape to be either a child kidnapping fairy or a pile of backpacks. Pam squatted next to the bags and started feeling for her light. The flashlight finally revealed itself in the pocket that Pam had looked in, more like felt in, 3 times. Now armed with a super bright morgue light, Pam slipped over to the window. She was going to shove the light into the glass and blind whoever was looking in. This would incapacitate them long enough to deal with them in either a very hostile and painful manner or to see who it was. The shadow was still centered in the glass. Pam eased the light up to the edge of the window. She had her finger on the switch. Moving quickly, she moved the light to the head of the shadow and hit the switch. The light came on. There on the other side of the glass was a dead guy that was standing in front of a group of hideous, deformed creatures that also looked dead. The face of one was mostly bone. One eye was missing, and the other was nothing to look at or with. Hair stuck out in clumps, mostly held in place by dirt. The thing moved over towards the door. The rest of the mass of zombies followed. Pam didn't scream. She had dealt with monsters so often she was becoming immune to fear. She was ready to deal with these monsters, one on many. Sarah and Belle both jumped out of their sleeping bags. "What's all the screaming? Who's being murdered? What are those things?" Pam realized that she had maybe let out with just a bit of a yell. "There's a horde of zombies on the porch and they're trying to get in." She had her back to the door, holding it shut while the uninvited guests tried to push it open. Belle waved one hand over her head and then pointed her fingers at the door. There was a sound like wet mud hitting the floor. A tiny fireball had hit the door just above Pam's head. "I guess I'd better wake up first." Pam was losing her fight. She thought back to the radio show she'd listened to on the drive up here. Something about a bunch of Russian students in a tent in the snow. "Quick, grab the coats. Don't forget your boots and your gloves and your hats. Get everything on and be ready to run." Belle and Sarah both got their coats and their hats on, and on the right direction. Belle's running shoes were outside on the back porch so they could cool off during the night. She'd grabbed them on the way by. Sarah got the right boot on her left foot and then couldn't get it back off. Belle reached down and helped pull. Pam was sliding across the floor. Her socks had no purchase on the hardwood floor. "Are you two ready?" She looked at her friends. Sarah had gotten the right boot on the right foot. Belle was holding Pam's gear, ready to run and put on at the same time. "Go!" Pam pushed away from the front door and ran for the back. As she went, the zombies poured into the cabin. Sarah swung the door open and ran out. Belle held Pam's boots up in the one hand. As Pam was running, she lifted one foot, and somehow a boot wound up on it. She did the same thing a second time, and now had her feet protected from the ice and the snow. Belle did a weird little dance move and managed to get her shoes on, the laces flapping around as she ran. They immediately began to steam. The three girls took off at a dead run for the campers on the far side of the tailings. Pam struggled to get her coat on as they went. "That is a horrible place to stop, but I'm going to stop anyway." Tune in next time for another adventure of the bogus anomalous group. Find out what happens to Pam and Belle and Sarah. See if they get caught by zombies and eaten. Till next week, this is Chris James for Story Time.